The U.S. Army ICV Stryker combat vehicle system. This 8-wheeled monster is light, fast, and comes in a variety of shapes, sizes, and loadouts. From the standard troop carrier with a Mark 19 grenade launcher or an M2 50 caliber machine gun, to the mortar carrier variant, all the way up to the mobile gun system and her powerful 105mm gun. The Stryker is part of a new style of mechanized warfare. Not quite as heavy as the mech brigades of the 1980s and 90s, but not as light as the old motorized rifle in light infantry battalions tooling around in trucks or on foot. With the threat of huge armored Soviet and Western tank forces rolling across the Fulda Gap now all but a distant memory, military forces all over the world are switching to this style of vehicle. From the Finnish and Croatia Patria APC, to the German and British GTK Boxers, and even Brazil, Argentina, and many other countries around the world. But would it surprise you to find out that all these 8-wheeled armored vehicles all owe a debt of gratitude to a vehicle so flawed in its design that it took 2 separate versions and a war to lift it from a failure to a fighter? Today, Combat Ineffective looks at the one that started them all, the BTR-60. At the end of the Second World War, the Red Army was in the process of steadily modernizing their vast infantry forces to become a more motorized and therefore more mobile force. During the Second World War, the primary way troops got to the front line was in this, the ZIS-6 truck. It's just your standard heavy-duty cargo truck. Equipped with benches in the cargo bed, it can be quickly converted into a troop transport. They weren't fast, they weren't sturdy, they had little to no armor protection. But what they lacked in those strengths, they made up in being cheap and quick to build. And with the Wehrmacht pouring troops at you, you need every soldier you can get to the front. But now that the war is over, and the Soviets have modernized along the way with their tank forces, air force, and even their artillery and infantry small arms, their transport for troops to the front needed to be updated as well. Enter the BTR-152. Similar in design to the American M3 half-track and the German SDF half-track, but with wheels instead of tracks for the rear of the vehicle. These provided the first step forward. Cheap to build and with some armored protection, it was a step in the right direction. But it was simply just a redesign of a standard truck rather than a purpose-built vehicle, and on top of that it was slow, had poor maneuverability over rough terrain, and was not particularly well suited for mobile warfare. A fact that was soon realized during the Suez Crisis in Egypt and the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. It became very clear that a new vehicle was needed. The new vehicle would have to be more mobile than the BTR-152, would need to carry up to 14 troops, and needed to also be amphibious as well. With the amphibious capability being a priority, the design took on a different shape than that of a standard truck. The new vehicle also was designed with an 8-wheel design to provide better overland mobility for transporting troops. It had decent armor protection to stop 7.62mm rifle fire, along with shrapnel from artillery bursts and grenades. Equipped with rear-mounted engines, the new vehicle was open-topped like the BTR-152. It was equipped with a pintle-mounted 7.62mm machine gun for support fire as well. This open-top design would not last long, and soon the BTR-60 PA was introduced with an enclosed troop compartment. This compartment was also equipped with portholes for individual troops in the rear to be able to fire while still inside the vehicle. A further update to the BTR-60 PB took the turf from the BRDM-2 scout car and added it to the BTR-60. This increased the firepower with an added 14.5mm main cannon and a coaxial 7.62mm machine gun in the gunner's turret. The BTR was fitted with 2 6-cylinder GAZ-40P engines located side by side in the rear of the vehicle. This combined power of the engines is 180 horsepower. Each engine propels 2 of the vehicle's axles. The engine on the right propels the second and fourth axles, while the one on the left propels the first and the third axles. Each engine has its own 4-speed gearbox with a single shielded hydraulic controlled clutch and an exhaust. Each axle has its own differential and is hung on transversal torsion bars. The two-engine setup has an advantage in the fact that each engine could work without the other. This means that if one engine is disabled, it does not affect the other one, and the vehicle can still move, albeit with reduced speed. The vehicle was easy to put into production and cheap to build, another plus to any vehicle in the Soviet system. As a result, over 25,000 of the BTR-60 in all variants were produced. The BTR-60 quickly replaced the BTR-152 in the frontline motor rifle regiments. However, the time for this was short-lived, as the newer and more armed and armored BMP-1, the Soviet Union's first infantry fighting vehicle, began to take its place in frontline units. As a result, by the late 1960s, only secondary units and border guard divisions still had the BTR-60. Keep this fact in mind, because it becomes very important later on. Hey, do you like the video you're watching right now? Then click the like and subscribe buttons before you forget. Like the Soviets forgot the BTR-60 with less equipped units. Now back to the video. The BTR-60 finally had its Soviet combat debut in the Sino-Soviet conflict on Zhenbao Island. The BTR-60 proved its value as an armored personnel carrier. The vehicles would quickly dismount their troops, and with the fire from their guns and armor protection, would provide a mobile shield for the advancing infantry. The vehicle performed well in most categories, except when subjected to RPG fire, in which several BTRs were damaged or destroyed by Chinese RPGs. With conflicts and client states buying them around the world, most with good results after, the BTR-60 remained in production and in use with all but the top-tier frontline troops in the Soviet bloc. Then in 1979, a low-priority conflict for the Soviets would expose all of the flaws of the BTR-60 and leave the Soviets scrambling to replace it. It was time for the BTR-60 to meet Afghanistan. When a communist coup overthrew the monarchy ruling the country, Afghanistan was quickly plunged into a civil war. When the Soviet desire for the communist regime to stabilize itself through diplomatic means failed, the Soviet Union made the decision to deploy troops to the Central Asian nation. Starting with Spetsnaz and airborne troops at the start, and larger units began to be required, the Soviets turned to some of their second-tier troops to lead the invasion. This was due to the Soviet Union considering Afghanistan to be a low priority. With their best troops primarily defending Europe, equipped with BMP-1 IFVs and T-72s, Afghanistan was given T-62 tanks and motorized rifle divisions equipped with, you guessed it, the BTR-60. Afghanistan is an unrelenting environment for both man and machine. With a climate and geography that can go from sandy deserts with high heat to valleys and snow-capped mountains and others, it is a world apart from anything the Soviets could have prepared for. The BTR-60 was going to provide the majority of the transport for Soviet troops throughout the country, with the Afghan Mujahideen having very little in the ways of military training, and even less in equipment initially. The Soviets had a distinct advantage.
So what else did they need?
Same thing of us, AK-47s, AK-74s, AKMS. Soviets didn't come into Afghanistan on a Eurail pass. They came in T-55 tanks.
As the Mujahideen began to be trained and supplied by a variety of places, including from Muslim allies such as Egypt and Pakistan, to the training and weapons from the CIA, along with covert support from the Israelis, the BTR-60 began to take losses. With the vulnerability to RPGs, it didn't take long for Mujahideen guerrillas, equipped with RPGs, to start picking off the lightly armored vehicles. With the high mountain valley roads, yet another flaw in the BTR-60 design would become evident. The main 14.5mm cannon could not elevate high enough to engage Mujahideen fighters high above, leaving the BTR-60s and the BRDM-2, equipped with the same turret design, defenseless in case of cliffside or mountaintop ambush. Remember that twin-engine design for the BTR-60? It too became a flaw in this design. The twin engines required a great deal more maintenance and were prone to reliability issues and breakdowns. Even worse still, the engines were prone to overheating normally, and in the desert heat of Afghanistan, many BTR crew had to deal with engine fires adjacent to the troop compartments. Further still, the only exits for troops in the vehicles was out through the hatches on the top of the vehicle only, making entry and exit difficult. Soviet troops were more accustomed to riding on the top of the vehicle as a result of the heat generated by the engines. But with the constant ambushes from the Mujahideen fighters, armed with such weapons as AK-47s and even old Lee Enfield rifles, they now rode inside the vehicles in the stifling heat without any air conditioning in the vehicles. With losses mounting, the Soviet response was to provide more close air support in the form of the Mi-24 helicopter. The heavy firepower was enough to free the entangled Soviet troops from the ambushes and attacks until the Mujahideen began to be supplied with American-made Stinger missiles. The design of the engines of the Mi-24s led them to being constantly harassed by the missiles and reducing their effectiveness as a result. Realizing that their vehicle was in need of a redesign, the Soviets quickly produced and sent their newest APC, the BTR-60, to Afghanistan as quick as they could be built. But it too was found to be fatally flawed. The BTR-60 had the same turret design, along with the same engine and layout, with the only major difference being two side doors for troops to enter and exit the vehicle. A dangerous prospect to use while the vehicle is moving, since it is right between the tires and low to the ground. With both the BTR-60 and the BTR-70 showing to be ambush and RPG magnets, along with being armored coffins for troops, the Soviets sent yet another replacement in the form of the BTR-80. The BTR-80 was vastly improved over both previous designs. For starters, the side doors were redesigned to allow easier exit of the vehicle, especially while in motion. The turret was redesigned to provide a higher angle of elevation than either the BTR-60 or 70 could provide unmodified. It also was equipped with night vision capabilities, as well as better off-road handling, including climbing hills with as much as a 60-degree angle incline. So if the BTR-60 and 70 were such failures in combat, why do we see not only newer 8-wheeled vehicles appearing in militaries of the world, but also see the BTR-60 itself in service almost 50 years later? For the BTR-60 itself, the Soviets produced so many of them and sold them to many different clients around the world that as long as they're still working, they can still be seen in combat. As for the newer generations of vehicles, imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. While the BTR-60 was a flawed vehicle, the design premise was not. With some simple modifications to the basic design, and you have a well-rounded combat system with a great deal of versatility. And with so many different ones being made now, you could bet that the legacy of the BTR-60 will prove far more useful than the vehicle itself was on the battlefield. Now that we have shown you all the strengths and the weaknesses of the BTR-60, we will now go into a simulated scenario. In this simulation, a Soviet motor rifle company will get ambushed along their path to their base. The Mujahideen fighters have superior numbers but lesser training. Both sides are equipped with period-appropriate weaponry. In this scenario, the 4 BTR-60s are being escorted by 2 BRDM-2 scout cars. The Soviet soldiers are armed with standard small arms and some RPGs and grenade launchers, along with the turret-mounted machine guns in all the armored vehicles. The Mujahideen are armed with a hodgepodge of weapons. The weapons include AK-47s, Dragoon sniper rifles, RPK light machine guns, RPG-7s, and a small number of Dish-K 12.7mm mounted machine guns. There's also a couple Lee Enfield rifles in the mix as well. In this scenario, we chose to leave out the close air support to keep the scenario as infantry versus infantry. We wish to thank all of our supporters on Patreon, including Generals Richie and Sergio Suarez. If you wish to support our channel, consider becoming a patron. Link in the description. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at CombatInEffect1. You can also find our gaming channel on Twitch at CombatInEffective1. All our links are in the description below. Be sure to like and subscribe and comment below, and I will see you on the next video.